Hello and welcome to The Print. I'm Snehesh Alex Philip. Well, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has come back from his trip to the US where he met with the American president or the new American president, Donald Trump. We've seen visuals of it, we've seen the smile, the joy, and also the joint statement. But where is the India US ties actually headed under Trump administration? And to discuss this further, I have with me our favorite guest, venture capitalist Asha Jadeja here with us. Welcome to the Print Map.
Thank you, Snehesh. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Straight away, what is your big takeaways from Prime Minister Modi's visit to the US?
Well, given the timing, right? He's one of the first few, leaders of the world who was invited in the first 2 weeks. This is huge. This goes to show that what Trump administration is doing is even stepping up over what Biden team was doing in terms of signaling to the rest of the world that the U.S. is actively wooing India to be part of its geopolitical balance of power game in the Asian subcontinent, in fact, in all of Asia. So it's not only signaling that it's working with India in empowering the U.S. Pole, but also that it's an old friendship. There's great chemistry between Modi and Trump. And by the way, never underestimate the meaning of the hug. Trump never hugs anybody. So if he has hugged Modi, there's meaning to that, and we must take it seriously. But the level of discussion that happened was something that's unprecedented. We have never seen this before. From discussing civil nuclear energy collaboration to defense partnerships to marine joint exercises in the Indo-Pacific. Uh, Everything suggests to me that Trump was trying to signal to China that this is a behemoth that it will have to it'll have to encounter if it does not if it goes beyond certain red lines.
Okay, perfect. While of course there is no doubt about the fact that Trump and Modi enjoy a great chemistry, it was really visible there. But Trump has been critical of India and has been literally pressurizing India over the whole tariff issue, right? No, while and that is something going forward could become. Do you think could become a sticky point between the two countries?
Not really, because what I saw coming from Modi's side in the joint statement is they preempted the whole tariff tension by actually proactively saying that certain reciprocal tariffs were fair, and India actually suggested it was willing to toe the line of the U.S. as long as there was going to be a quid pro quo on certain technology transfers, on especially on nuclear power. So it did fantastic, and I think India also signaled to Trump in a very strategic manner that it will continue having a relationship with Russia, and Trump was completely okay with that. And given the developments of the last 2 days, as far as Trump and Russia goes, I think Modi's instinct was right in suggesting and in staying the course, and reiterating that India's strategic and economic ties with Russia will continue. I think on the defense side, Modi's signaling was that it will not be that. I think it will likely end up buying much more from US rather than from Russia, simply because the Russian equipment is just not state of the art. It doesn't meet the standards of today's defense capabilities and needs. So Modi once again played it very right, very very instinctively. He played it right in staying his course with Russia, and I think they even recommended to the U.S. that if India is going to be working with Iran on port development, that we need that guarantee that it's going to be it's going to be safe for India to continue working on an Iranian port. So I think this is unprecedented. What we saw in this meeting was something that we have never seen before. Even on the Trump side, I think the overall excitement in Washington D.C. was from every quarter was that this is one of the most consequential relations, simply because of the size of the two nations.
Of course, there is no doubt about the fact that this is one of the most consequential relations for India as well as for the US as well. But many critics who would look at this visit would and say that this was a trip where it was India trying to please not the US but the Trump administration, right? We were willing to offer concessions. We were, even before the visit, there were steps that were taken by the government to cut down on the duties per se. So there is a feeling that it is that Trump has the upper hand. How would you respond to that?
Trump is, as we all know, he's transactional and he likes to be thinking about what's in it for him and for the US. And I think Modi played that game beautifully. They proactively came here with a very good agenda of sort of saying we are going to go along with Trump's transactional demands. And I think in a larger setting, Modi, I think, is as sharp, if not sharper than Trump, and more transactional. And I think what will emerge from this relationship is much more on technology transfer and on civil nuclear, transfers. That if the U.S. ends up setting up our nuclear plants, we are looking at a much shorter timeline in terms of reaching 100 gigawatts of energy production. And for that, don't be surprised if it happens much faster than the deadline of 2047. Um, uh, and it will substantially need US cooperation. So I think in the long run, this is a clever bet on showing that we are interested in doing our part on reciprocal tariffs, and here are the following concessions. But if the Trump team goes along with the civil nuclear transfers, then I think we are looking at a much bigger bang for the buck.
So you're looking at a much bigger bank. You're saying that this is going to be transactional relationship. India is very well aware of it, and India is willing to play the game. That's what you say.
Modi is as transactional as Trump, although he does not.
He
I
comes
don't
from
know.
the land of he's a good Jew at the end of the day.
He's a good Jew, yeah, and so he is unlike he knows what he's doing. Between him and Jaishankar, we
Hmm.
have two sharks, and they will bring for India what is crucial for India, not just for immediate economics, but for long term economic gain and also defense and security gains, and much more. I don't know how to put value to this, but even much more of a geopolitical, a sort of a strategic leadership role for India going forward. And India cannot have that geopolitical leadership role in Asia unless it has the backing of the US. So this was actually, in my book, this was, uh, this was technological, economic, and strategic major victory for Modi and for Trump. Trump, I think, for domestic front, is happy about what happened and is happy about the concessions. That's what he wanted. But remember, India is a much smaller economy, and so what we are going to be giving as concessions is, it's not as important as what the Trump team will deliver in the next 4 years.
Well, that's a very interesting take. You mentioned that whatever concessions India are going to give, and these are all calculated concessions. It's not under pressure or something, or Trump is arm twisting India. But you said that whatever concessions that India is going to give is nothing compared to what India is going to get in return.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's
So
right. So both in terms of civil nuclear deals, and it, together with that, even on technology front, even on AI, on how AI unfolds and how we partner on AI front, how we partner on data sharing, how we partner on where we are going to be selling certain things in Europe and around the world. For all those reasons, I think it was that this was a win for India for the
you
long
know,
haul.
under the last Trump administration, India had signed the S-400 deal with the Russians, right? And there was always a fear of Katsa. It was like a sword which was hanging over the head. The Trump administration never imposed Katsa on India. And you mentioned about the fact that Russia did come up, and India has a stand on Russia. Given given the current talks between Trump, administration and the Russian administration of the Ukraine, do you think the relations between the two are going to stabilize and the Trump administration is going to fix the Russia issue, stabilize its relations, probably take out the sanctions against Russia or at least some of it, and focus on China?
Uh, Listen, the Trump team has done a 180-degree on Russia from where Biden left off.
Yeah,
So the Trump team, in my book, recognizes number one that we destabilized Ukraine, that we were the ones who were responsible for toppling what was Yanukovych or somebody who was the president in 2014.
yeah,
We were the ones, and our CIA was part of the whole drama, where we toppled a democratically elected president who then finally ran away to Russia. And after that, the panic and anxiety in Russia has gone through the roof. The Putin has gone out of his way to communicate in the first Trump term that they were getting nervous about our role in Ukraine, about American role in Ukraine. Unfortunately, nothing came out of it. And then by the time Trump lost his second election, and Biden came on board, by that time the Biden team was much more proactive in believing that we should continue this tension with Russia, continue signaling that we were going to expand NATO, and let Russians get nervous and anxious. We knew we were triggering a war. Now, in my view, and this might sound a little bit more, more like I'm coming from, far right, but I'm not. I actually do feel that there were serious kickbacks for the Democrats in in triggering a war with Russia, because this, out of the 350 billion that was given to Zelensky, who is our puppet, you know,
yeah,
150 billion is unaccounted for. And both
exactly.
Zelensky and US have acknowledged that that money was lost. In my book, that money went to the democratic electoral machinery, and it was part of the elections are won in US on money and strictly on money, and a lot of that money has gone into electioneering, and still the Dems lost. uh, so I think our game in the U.S. game in the Russia-Ukraine war has been a dirty game, and I'm proud of Trump for having come back in and cleaned up the whole narrative there, and said that what we are that Ukraine is slaughtering children, right?
Yeah.
17, 18, and 19 in this war. 600,000 are dead. Another 500,000 civilians are dead. I mean, we are looking at a massacre and a carnage like we haven't seen since World War II. So Trump is doing morally and in every way the right thing by saying that this war has to stop, and by putting pressure on even on the U.S. side by saying that, look, this is something that internally was triggered by us. So we need to work on this. I think it's going to happen, and Trump has a very good relationship with Putin. Where India comes into the picture is that so does Modi, and Modi has tried to play a role of peacemaker and mediator both with Zelensky and Putin, and will probably continue doing so. And even on that front, Modi and Trump are on the same page. So this is just an unprecedented level of synergy between the two nations on geopolitics.
Okay. The one big fear is the fact that while US is stabilizing its relations, will probably stabilize its relations with Russia. The fact is that Russia and China are in bed together, right? So eventually, how do you see that happening? And where does India really come into play? Because India has relations with Russia. It has to balance now its relations. And Russia has deep relations with China now. How do you see this going forward?
So we were the ones, US was the one that pushed Russia into the arms of China. We are wooing it back. We are taking it back. And Trump is taking it back. I mean, hats off to the man on his geopolitics and is figuring out that more urgent for US right now is to keep an eye on China and not be bogged down on this whole, this minor, for from our perspective, this is a minor attention, minor sort of kerfuffle on the European side that we are wasting our time on, and a lot of hawks in the US feel that very strongly, that from Jeffrey Sachs to John Mearsheimer and all these academics who've been studying it for the last 30 years, they are convinced that this is a complete waste of time for the US, while China is not only becoming a giant economically and defense wise, but has already started sniffing around Greenland and started sniffing around the Panama Canal. It's a big deal, and I think it's a massive win for Trump to call out the Chinese on the Panama Canal. And I think that and the Panamanians backtracking on the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative in Panama is a big win for Trump, and hats off to him for calling it out.
That is true. That's a one way of looking at it. Now, coming back to the whole, Prime Minister Modi's visit to the US. Trump in his opening statement had mentioned that India is going to buy billions of dollars worth of defense equipment, security equipment in the next 1 year and more. You know, is there now a pressure for India to buy more from the US, not because the systems are good. I'm not saying the systems are bad, but because there is pressure from the Trump administration, and with the US, one never knows. The administration changes, things change. So how do you look at it?
So there are two ways of looking at it. I think there are two strains there. One way of looking at it is that Trump was definitely announcing this as a part of domestic consumption. He was signaling to his voter base that, look, this is what I'm doing, right? I have two things he did. One was he caught hold of Larry Ellison of Oracle, Masayoshi Son of SoftBank, and Sam Altman of OpenAI to say, look, we're going to pitch in $500 billion for Stargate. That's an announcement, right? It's basically an announcement for the domestic base to say, look, how great is Trump that in the first 2 weeks he's landing business, right? Where this is going to end, who knows? Similarly, what he's announcing for the domestic base, for domestic consumption, is that, look, I'm getting India to cough up some money for us and to establish businesses. I think what's really going to happen on the ground, my guess is that Indian businesses are going to set up shop in US, and they're going to get very favorable terms for that. And if that happens, we are looking at job creation in the US through Indian businesses, massive Indian business houses that could be establishing, operations for ports, for shipbuilding, even for oil drilling. And we have the Adanis, Ambanis, the Tatas, the Mahindras. There are a lot of things that can establish some business here. So this whole idea about just India buying, F-35s, or India buying some defense equipment, that I think that pressure is not as, I think it's not as intense as we would like to think. I think it's much more signaling for the domestic base.
Okay, you mentioned about the oil and gas. Now, the whole thing is that Trump wants India to buy more, and India is committed to buying more, right? Then what happens to the oil that we're getting from Russia? How does it affect the Russians? The Russians are worried about the fact that India is the biggest buyer of oil for them. So how do you balance these two things? It becomes very tricky. Do you think that the road ahead is going to be tricky?
So what India did very smartly was ended up buying cheap Russian oil in the time of crisis, right? For the last 2 3 years, this was post pandemic, and there was a war, and the Russians were desperate to sell the oil. Now, and it was cheap, and we got the crude, we got the Ambanis to process that oil and resell it to back to the same base. We did a guju thing there, and we made tons of money, and this was a win. Going forward, there is no doubt that the US will be pumping much more oil. I mean, drilling is part of Trump's ethos on how we are going to be making money. This will actually put a lot of pressure on the Middle East and things like that. And we will end up. I think India will end up buying more seriously from the US than from Russia. But while the deal was there, while the sale was going on, 50% off or whatever was the deal at that time, we made hay while the sun was shining, and we made out like bandits. Hats off to the Modi team for pulling this off. I don't think the deal is the same anymore. At that time, it was the sale was really phenomenal, and we did wonderfully.
Yeah, we bought the oil from Russia, and then we sold it to the Europe. That's how it was a win-win situation for all. Now, since I talk about Europe, now over the whole Ukraine issue, you have seen a clear division between the Europe and the US. And when I say US, it's the Trump administration. And it has been led primarily by France, right? Now, India has a great equation with the European countries, and especially with France. Do you think that the tensions between the Trump and France would impact India's own relations and India's own maneuverability in Europe, and especially with France?
No, not in the least bit. And the reason, but first of all, Macron is coming here in a few days, right? Next week, Macron is coming, and then the British Prime Minister comes, few days after that. These guys definitely want to, make sure that they are in the good books of Washington D.C. Macron is not in any way confrontational with the U.S. I think what they really want is for U.S. to not really back out from guaranteeing security participation for NATO. Right now, we are still heavy lifting. U.S. is paying for most of NATO security, and the Europeans are getting a pass on that. Germany is maybe thinking of sending a few people. UK is thinking of sending a few people, but still, they are all freeloading on the U.S. So I think that they might make some noises, but I think that on the Ukraine front, and I was actually there at the Munich Security Conference, and what I saw overall was that there was a gap, or there was a division between the European elite, which is probably 10%, but 90% of Europe is pro Trump, and believes that what Trump is saying is right, that the Europeans need to they need to pay up their fair share of defending Europe from a belligerent Russia. But more importantly, I also think that there's another a wave coming in Europe, which is that of Europe moving to the right.
Yeah.
So it's very, you can see that happening in Germany. There's pressure on Europeans right now for sort of recognizing that there's a global movement towards the right, which says, you know just like America first, it's saying Europe first. My nation first. There's an anti-immigrant sentiment. There's a sentiment which is sort of going along the U.S. line of sort of saying, free speech, enough of this, wokeism, enough of mollycoddling immigrants who have arrived illegally, enough of a large, massive welfare state. So there is that element happening in Europe, and I see Europe tilting more and more towards philosophically towards what Trump is doing, which is make America great again. Openly hostile to having rampant migrants coming in. So there is that there's that dynamic also, which is influencing sort of
Yeah.
citizen sentiment in Europe.
Okay, perfect. You use this term "make America great again," and that comes to my last question: is the fact that India Prime Minister Modi talks about "make in India," literally, which is "make India great again," right? Loose translation of it, because
Right. That
that's
is
the
the
ultimate.
Viksit Bharat. I mean, he has announced Viksit Bharat.
Yeah, Viksit Bharat, right?
Yeah.
And Trump has this "Make America Great Again." So there are many people who say that this is a clash, right? So this is a relationship that is bound to see tensions because both countries are looking at Viksit Bharat, Viksit US. How would you respond to that?
No, I think that's fair. I think both countries, and including Europe, they are all, look at Europeans talking about making Europe great again. I think people are beginning to recognize that it is important, and it's okay to be working towards domestic concerns more seriously rather than this globalist approach. In fact, the pressure globally right now is on this nonsense that has been spewed out by the left about open borders, globalist thinking, all world is one family. That's nonsense. This is the first time that we are seeing, driven by an American president, this whole movement towards saying we are shutting our borders. This is not a one friendly world, one world family anymore. We are shutting our borders. We are looking after our own people first. And that is what is driving the US agenda. And as that trickles down to Europe, I think we are going to see more and more of that happening even in India, which is Make India Great Again. And Viksit Bharat, Make in India, those initiatives will be appreciated by the rest of the world. They are continued. There's no conflict between any of that, you know. And I think, but still, that said, what binds US and India are our common values of democracy, freedom of speech, and our focus on growth. Both of our national leaders are focused on growth and prosperity and peace. They don't believe in war as a machinery of growth, as an engine of growth. That was only from the democratic side that we saw. The Dems were the ones who believed that war could sort of kick off revival of certain segments of the industry. I think that's absolutely wrong.
Okay. The fact is that the whole India-US relations under the Trump administration has kickstarted on a good note, right? And one would really have to wait and see how what's the road ahead. It looks very promising, and thank you so much, Asha, for bringing in your perspective, and bringing in the nuances that was needed to understand, whether what kind of road lies ahead. Thank you
What
so
is
much.
Snehesh, one sec. I just want to ask you one question. What's happening in India? What do you guys what are you seeing in the media? What is the media chatter saying? What are you seeing? Are people as bullish about this US India future as we are in the US?
Well, there is no doubt about the fact that while there is a small segment which is not bullish, but a large segment is bullish about the whole India-US partnership and the future that is there, right? But there are a lot of skeptics too. Also, for example, some would say that there's a trust factor, or there's a distrust factor in the US. Like, for example, Trump came in, and suddenly Europe, the commitments that was made to Ukraine is changing, right? So the whole fear is that at the end of the day the US cannot be trusted. So there's still a whole lot of section among the people who believe that, even for example, let's say the F-35 offer, not the offer but eventual offer, when and if it comes, there are people who are already saying that we should buy the Su-57, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Su-57, even though it is not proved, it's not a real stealth aircraft as the Russians would want it to be. But the fact is that there is a significant section of people who distrust America.
True.
Yeah, so that factor is still there, but within the government, within the administration, as far as I know, whoever I speak to, there is I would say they are bullish about the India US ties and the potential, and especially under the Trump administration. I don't know, we even when we used to speak earlier during the Biden administration, and he used to keep saying this, that while the policies continued, while the relations did grow under Biden, the administration here is looking forward to a Trump administration,
Okay,
right?
that's good to know. But I also think that you're right about this. I just actually want to add before we close this
Yeah,
talk
absolutely. Go ahead.
that we are expecting in Washington D.C. and U.S. and now I've become a Republican actually. Well, we are expecting 12 years of conservative rule. 12
Okay.
years. So yes, Trump is growing old, but before he goes, wait and see how we have good people on our team. And that's going to be phenomenal for India. It's going to be golden age of India also.
Oh, lovely. Looking forward to that. And as I said, now that you've mentioned that you've now become a Republican, congratulations to that. Hriday Parivartan is what one would say in Hindi, right? But
Yes,
thank
and
you.
it has happened to many Indians, by the way. Many have shifted.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The Trump and the way that Trump functions, there's a genuine fan base of Trump here, right? It is not just political, it's just the way that he functions. So there is a fan base of Trump here.
I'm
But
so
thank you so
happy to hear
much.
that. Thank you. Thank you so much,
Thank
Snehesh.
you so much for joining at the print. As always, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Take care.